everyone, and welcome to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Ben Opapari, and since 2010, I've run the Songwriters on Process website, where you can find more than 200 conversations with songwriters about their creative process. I'm not here to talk about tour stories, band drama, how a band got its name, or favorite foods. My goal is to treat songwriters like we treat prose writers, as writers, plain and simple. This is an intelligent conversation about the writing process between two writers. And today I'm talking to Mia Berrin of Pom Pom Squad. So I'm sure this has happened to you before, where you hear a song for the first time and you may be doing something else and it, comes on YouTube or, streaming or anything. And immediately you say, wow, that's an incredible song. Who is that? And that's what happened to me the first time I heard Pom Pom Squad's song, Head Cheerleader. And I think it came up on my YouTube algorithm, and I immediately heard it and thought, wow, this is an incredible song. I love this song. The guitar, the melodies, it's so catchy. It is from her, or Pom Pom Squad's debut album, Death of a Cheerleader. But it's not just the song, it's the videos. And if you listen to the album, do me a favor and watch the videos. The videos are just so cinematic. And it's not really surprising because, as Berrin told me, she said, I think of everything I write as a score. She got her start in dramas. She actually went to NYU to study acting. And so when you see these videos, the colors, the images, the actions, you'll see where she gets. And she says her biggest influences are John Waters and David Lynch. And that's really no surprise once you see these. So again, don't just listen to the music, watch the videos. And Berrin told me something interesting also. She said that when she writes, she can often feel the shape of the song before she hears it. The easiest way for her to start is to imagine an image that goes around the song, then write from there. And she also said something about she sees colors and she sees songs in colors, and how a song looks is as important as how it sounds. And I think she told me that this album, she saw this album in red. And there's a lot of red in the videos anyway. So that's it. So for now, let's listen to my Songwriters on Process interview with Mia Berrin of Pom Pom Squad. Yeah. So let's get started. I always like to start by asking, outside of songwriting, how much writing are you doing? Whether it's journaling, I think I read somewhere that you journaled at some point, but outside of songwriting, how much writing are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I used to journal every day. It was a really important part of my routine, and I think really helped me through my childhood and adolescence, just being able to put my feelings into words. I tend to be sort of private and a little bit more soft-spoken, which is something that I don't think I even fully realized about myself. But, I would have a tendency to, if I was I had a tendency, if I was feeling something, to write about it before I would actually talk about it. So did a lot of journaling. I would journal like every day, multiple times a day. I think as I've gotten older, that's not been as easy to do. It's something that I wish I did more, but I have a really strong, I'm very passionate about journaling. I really appreciate that I have those records of my life. And I think it was a really good lesson in songwriting, in brevity, learning to say more with less.
Would those journals ever become song ideas? Do you ever go back to anything that you've written and say, yeah, I'd like to write a song about this? Did that happen often? Or does it?
Definitely. Most definitely. I think the other thing that's sort of funny about my journals is like kind of realizing maybe the cardinal lessons in my life, the things that I come back to over and over and over, the things that I knew even when I was a teenager, that I'm like relearning. It's silly, but an example I have from recently is I was looking back through my old journal, and I tend to, I'm a shopper. I love things. And I, go through the mental tug of war of like, why do I feel like material objects are going to make me better or more interesting? Or, I'm like, am I just a pawn of capitalism? Like, am I allowed to like, pretty things and clothes and shoes and jewelry, or is that just, shallow and extremely rapid? And I was reading a journal of mine from high school. And in that journal, I said something along the lines of, I think I'm like the dream of a capitalist society because I always think that whatever I buy is going to make me cooler or deeper or more interesting. And like, it's something that I didn't realize I had been thinking about for so long or aware of for so long. Is my, sort of complicated relationship with material things. So it always feels like there's something that, even if I think it's new, seems to be an issue that just, I come back to over and over. And sometimes when I discover those things again, especially if I'm writing a song about that already, it just kind of deepens my perspective a little bit and gives me even more material to draw from.
Yeah. Do you need distance to be able to write about an event or an emotion? I mean, I always bring up Hemingway. Hemingway said he could never write about Paris when he was in Paris. He needs to be away from it to be able to write about it. And I think we can talk about that in terms of events or emotions, because you're looking back at those journals that you wrote a few years ago. But do you need distance to be able to write effectively about something in a song, or is it better to write about it, in the immediacy of it?
I think I've had experiences where, with both sides of the coin. I think generally for me, I have to have a level of distance. And I think that's as simple as just having perspective on it, having time to understand how I feel. I think sometimes when you're speaking on impulse, and I think it's, it sort of sounds simple, but it's like when you're fighting with somebody that you love and you say the thing that, comes to your mind instead of maybe the thing that you should say. It's a matter of like speaking on impulse and speaking from an impassioned place, which, I think people, when they think of songwriting, they think, every single emotion, if they feel that it's raw or vulnerable, they have this assumption that it's completely raw and vulnerable and unfiltered. And I think I used to be somewhat resentful of people saying, my music was diaristic or felt, like it was pulled from a diary, because I felt like that was dismissive of the level of time and effort that goes into songwriting. And I also just thought, it was a way that I think I'd only really seen women described as diaristic.
Yeah.
And so I assumed that it was kind of like a, misogynistic and dismissive way of talking about writers who are women.
Sure.
But I think ultimately, like, the other side of that coin is, you want people to feel the passion and emotional strength in the words. You want people to be able to feel it, and like crafting something that feels that effortless to somebody is a good thing, is a really is an ability and a skill, and something I'm proud of. I think I feel maybe a little bit silly when I write on impulse, but some of my songs, there's a song on an EP that I wrote called Ow, which we actually just did a reissue of today, which is pretty cool. And the first song on the Ow, on the EP is called Ow Intro. And that's a song that I wrote, in 10 minutes. It said exactly what was on my mind and nothing else. And, and it became the song. That was kind of a quick and dirty, I had just broken up with somebody that morning and I wrote a song, but on Death of a Cheerleader, for example, the song Be Good was about, an event that had happened like years before, but that I had never really known how to speak about. And I also think the nature of the situations that I was writing about on Death of a Cheerleader were more complicated, versus, maybe some of the things I wrote when I was younger. Not to say that they're like naive, but you know, I was just exploring going through a breakup, and I don't know. Well, that's it's actually not fair to myself to say that I don't know that there was much else going into it. Um, you know what? Actually, that was also an EP processing something that had happened years ago. So maybe I do need time. I think maybe I feel like maybe sometimes things can be a catalyst. You know, for like reopening a memory or reopening a wound. But I do think actually in general, I need time to process my feelings before I can put them in a song. That was a very convoluted.
No, I love it. What I thought about was those songs. I want to talk about revision of lyrics. I guess those songs that you write on impulse, the ones that you write in 10 minutes, are you more likely to say, I'm not going to touch that? I shouldn't revise those lyrics because those are so raw. So I guess kind of two-part question. Those songs that you write on impulse, are you less likely to revise those? Or I guess more generally, do you do a lot of revision to your lyrics?
I tend to revise a lot, I think. I think there definitely been a handful of like miracle songs that just kind of happened, but I think I tend to agonize over my lyrics generally. I want to, I don't know. I always I want to make sure I'm saying the strongest and most honest thing that I can. I think those are two values in my songwriting that I really think about a lot is, does it feel specific? Does it feel honest? And does it feel evocative? And sometimes that means, I think sometimes like I over revise and I try to be too smart about certain things that don't need it. I think sometimes revision is about convincing yourself to maybe go for the 10-cent word instead of the $1 million word, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I think revision is important. I think I can only think about, like the song Again, from the Ow EP. That was a song that was kind of a miraculous experience because, I also I don't tend to like free associate. I usually, when I'm writing, the kind of free association part of the process is walking around or going out or having a moment where I, have like the initial spark or initial thought, initial description that comes to mind. And then I'll, usually write it down in a notebook or write it down in the notes on my phone and come back to it or, keep adding to it as more stuff comes to me. And then eventually I'll sit down and focus on putting a chord progression to that. Or, the other side of it is I'll come up with a, chord progression idea and then put the lyrics to that. But the song Again, that one was sort of strange because I kind of just sat down on my bed one day and I was just kind of starting to play songs in drop D. I had never really used alternative tunings before. And so I just started kind of strumming and, I put my little voice memo recorder on just to kind of see, record if there's anything, sometimes I'll go and listen back and see if there's something to mind for. And I remember the next day I was at work and I was like, what was that thing I wrote last night? And I listened, it was a completely fully formed song and nothing about it changed. From the beginning of the process to the end of the process was totally the same song. I think it shows in a way, and I don't mean that as a negative thing, but it's the only song that I have that's like 6 minutes long. And I think it's a really good song. I love playing it live. It's one of my favorite songs to do live, but it was one of the only songs that I can think of where I didn't go back and change the structure or change the lyrics or change, phrasing of anything.
I think as a writer myself, like You mentioned, over revising, and it's always tough for me to know when is it time to stop, right? I mean, when I'm just doing words, of course, I'm not doing music, but when I write, I kind of drive myself crazy because there is a point where the changes become so small, but you just know maybe if you did it one more time, you'd find that thing you didn't find last time. And it drives me crazy. How do you know when it comes to lyrics, is there a point where you just say, yeah, I got to put it down. There's nothing I can do to make this that much better. It's not worth the time.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm not really sure. I think, when do I put it down?
And because I'd like to know, it'll help me out as a writer, right? Because it drives me crazy when, you just find yourself changing the smallest stuff, and then you realize maybe it was better the first way. And I think there are times when I've changed something twice and I've changed it back to the original without realizing it.
Yeah. I think I am lucky enough to have a very strong internal bullshit detector. I have really, I'm extremely hard on myself. Like sometimes unhealthily so, but I do feel like I am my best quality control, and no matter how many times I show it to people in my life and they say, oh, it's perfect. If there's even like the little part of me that has doubt, I don't do it, or haven't at least. I think it's been interesting readjusting to having a structure around me that requires me to say the song's done because it's for Spotify and it needs to be finished by tomorrow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's been an interesting new part of the process, is kind of having to let go, not by choice, more just by force. But
that can make you a better writer. I think sometimes I work well under deadlines because if you know it's got to be done, you've got no choice. Do you think could that be a helpful part of your process to have that deadline?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely can be. I think, when I was in college, I did acting for the first 2 years, and then I eventually transferred to music school.
Yeah.
And I had a really amazing songwriting mentor named Mike Errico. And in his class, I would have to do a song a week. And, no matter what happens, you have to come in with a song. And, a lot of the songs from Death of a Cheerleader I actually wrote while I was in that class. And then I also wrote a lot of songs in that class that will never, ever see the light of day.
Right.
But I think having a deadline, it's like, not that that was like a soft deadline, because I did get a B in that class because I forgot to turn in a song. But, having the hard deadline of like, it has to come out and it's going to come out on a huge platform and everyone's going to judge you is definitely a lot harder than having, it's like a lot crueler maybe than having the deadline of, hey, you're going to get a B in the class if you don't, turn in this song.
Is there a ritual, I guess, to your process? I mean, how important is ritual? Do you have a time of day? Is there a favorite room you like to be in? For me, at least, as a writer, I think it's important to know, for me at least, where that stuff works the best. It doesn't mean anything, but at least there's that confidence to know that it's happened there before. Like in that chair, it'll happen there again. So I'm pretty particular about that. I do need to have a certain chair and things like that. I also never write and revise in the same place. That's also, but I think it's just like, I think it's important to know those things. So I'm just curious, how important is that to your writing process?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. Like it's sort of like, again, I'm still carving out my routine as a person who newly is like doing this professionally. Right. But, I remember I was talking to another artist recently who she was playing a show, and I remember like, it was a big festival and I was so extremely nervous, and she seemed so like calm and zen. And I was like, what do you like? How do you do that? And she's like, I pick a song, but this is the song that I listen to every time I'm about to go on stage, like something that calms me down And she's like, and then I do a little ritual with my bandmates before I go on stage, and I always feel ready to go on stage. And it's kind of like, utilizing the kind of lab rat Pavlov's dogs mentality of,
Yeah.
time I do this, it triggers this. Is really interesting to me. And I think, I'm lucky enough that I have a little 2-bedroom with my partner. So one of the rooms is my office. And especially around the time that I was doing Death of a Cheerleader, what really helped was just kind of surrounding myself with things that put me in the world of that record. For some reason, when I was writing that one in particular, I was very interested in texture, like physical, like textile. And, red velvet and red vinyl were two things that really inspired me, kind of spoke to me in terms of what I wanted the world of the record to feel like. I don't know. It's a little like weird to explain the way they connect in my head, but so I wanted to be surrounded. I bought like red velvet curtains, and I had these red vinyl gloves, and I, started to just accumulate little props and things that put me in the space of that record. And, I think with this project in particular, it's also very different than what I've done in the past, which is very kind of grounded in being a band, playing in a room, recording in practice spaces, very, 4 instruments, like, I don't know, just kind of very grounded in reality. And I think with this record, I wanted to be the complete opposite. I didn't want it to feel really grounded in any physical space. I wanted it to feel like its own, transmission from nowhere, kind of. So I think listening to a certain type of music, I make a lot of playlists that, I think listening is a huge part of my routine, and not listening really even with any intention. But during the pandemic, I had a lot of trouble listening to new music. And so part of my routine was I just listened to songs from the, like, anywhere from the 30s to the early 70s.
30s. Wow.
Yeah.
That's old. I thought you were going to say like 90s or something, or 80s. 30s. I'm wow. That's I've never heard that before. That's legit old.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think listening to recordings from that era, I don't know, just the soundscape is really different. And like listening as a person who, now has a background in recording and production and engineering, even like the way that a plate reverb sounds when they're actually using a physical plate,
Yeah.
to speak, versus like what we can make in a DI. Like it's kind of like, I don't know, modern recording, I think, aims to hide any kind of quirks or flaws. And I know that in a couple, years even, I'm going to listen to a recording from today and be like, oh, I can definitely hear how, it's like when you watch something CGI and, the day you watch it, you're like, this is amazing. It looks so high tech. And then you go back and watch it now and you're like, all right, I can see all the little pixels and
right.
All the little lines and squares. And that's kind of how I feel about recording. So I don't know. I just really liked the feel that it evoked. And I think especially music from that kind of stretch of time has this weird contextualized, like creepy feeling that kind of comes from nowhere in a way, because it's like all love songs and they're songs about, really saccharine things for the most part. And they sound really weird. They sound really creepy. And I loved that. And I loved the idea of kind of finding a way to exploit that. Yeah.
I'm interested in that, the thing with the color red, because I've never heard that. I've heard people, certain candles or pictures or stuff like that, but I've never heard a color before. So was that something where you said, oh, I'll pick the color red because I like the color red? Or were you having success writing something and you realized you were surrounded by red? Like, which came first, I guess, if that makes sense? I'm really interested in that. That's very interesting.
I don't know. I mean, I think it sort of felt like the color of the record.
Okay.
In a way, I think it was, it's a good question of like what came first. I think just, I don't know. It's weird kind of trying to explain how my brain works, but I think maybe kind of in the same way, if I was writing a play, um, I would say, here's the general theme of what I want to write about. And, you know, I have, let's say, the song Head Cheerleader written. And so if I know the theme is I want to write about my, you know, queer coming of age, but as a love story, that feels like Phil Collins produced Live Through This, I'm like, all right, so now I have like scene one, act one, now I have to fill in all the other scenes to make the play work. So that's kind of how I think about it when I'm making a project, which is typically what I write towards, and I like to write towards a thing. So I guess when I was thinking about that story and how I wanted to tell that story, a big part of it that came to me first was how I would want it to look and how I would want it to feel. And a huge part of that was like, thinking about the theme of, and I don't know if this was a conscious decision even, it might have just been like a free association that happened at some point, but I really love like David Lynch movies and John Waters, and I love really heavily stylized visual representations of somebody's story and world. I think that's just really exciting to me. And I think, film is a big part of my writing process because I feel like I almost think of everything as a score. So I don't know, when I was thinking of texture and like what that world would look like and feel like, I loved the idea of it feeling very artificial, doing like fake grass and fake sky and fake trees and fake flowers. It's kind of like everything feels like almost normal, but not quite, like that uncanny feeling. And I'm not really sure why, like red, latex, and vinyl, and what's the word I'm looking for? Like that kind of red PVC, like shiny, plasticky red.
Yeah.
Became such a part of my songwriting process, but it's like I just wanted to be. I think maybe part of it was, it's sort of like I knew what the songs sounded like in my head, but I didn't know, like, oh God, how do I describe this? It's like I can sort of like, it's almost like feeling for something in the dark where it's like I can feel the shape of the song or hear the shape of the song, but without actually hearing any music or lyrics. And so the easiest way for me to come to that sometimes is by imagining an image to go around it. So I think I wanted to really carve out the world and turn my life into the world. I think being in quarantine was also probably part of that, not really having any new experience, so having to create that for myself. But yeah, sort of like carving out my physical space to look like the internal space of the record. And then from there, it was easy to sort of use other songs and other visuals and other kind of, make homage to things that were part of that process in the record. I think it's also kind of like, I think of like sampling as like a texture almost. It's just a way to deepen the message of something you're trying to say, because now it's colored by all the associations that someone else might have with, a texture or a song or an artist. So it's sort of like, I don't know, it feels like I sort of made the bed for everything else until the song showed up.
And that's it for today's Songwriters on Process podcast with Mia Berrin of Pom Pom Squad. As a reminder, you can find all of my interviews with over 200 songwriters on my Songwriters on Process website at songwritersonprocess.com, going all the way back to 2010. You can read them, watch them, or listen to them. So until next time, thanks for listening.